Hey everybody, welcome to Todd Talks. I'm Papa Todd. If this is your first time here, I want to thank you for stopping by. I hope I catch your attention. I hope you stick around. So here I talk about world events, sports, American history. I like American history. And then a little workplace safety, and that's what I'm going to focus on right now is a little bit of workplace safety. So I've been a safety professional now. I'm an EH&S manager, which stands for Environmental Health and Safety. It's probably truly more, it's SHE, because primarily I'm safety, secondarily health, case management, making sure everybody's trying to do some healthy stuff at work, and then environmental. I'm also a security manager at the facility that I work at. I've been doing this now for 18, 19 years, something like that. I guess I'd have to sit down and really figure it out. I do have a master's degree in safety, security, and emergency management, so I have a little bit of schooling behind that. I also have a background in law, which kind of helps me with kind of interpretation of some things. That's kind of what I do, but really love what I do, and I got into it. So I had practiced law for a few years, got out of that, and I went back to working in feed mills, and it was actually a soy crush facility. I just didn't like practicing law. There's more to that, and maybe I'll talk about that sometime. But I got out of that, went back scooping soybeans for a living, really, and I was involved in a workplace death. It was a rescue turned retrieval, if you know what that means. That means you were no longer going to rescue the person; you were retrieving their body, and that's what happened. It was a grain engulfment in a soybean large grain elevator. Is what I got involved with. I'll probably talk more about that sometime when I'm talking about confined space. But just to kind of kick things off, I thought, a lot of people really don't know much about safety at all, and so I haven't done enough to prepare myself to really talk about the background of OSHA. OSHA was created in 1970 by the OSHA Act, Occupational Safety and Health Act, which created the OSHA administration, OSHA as we know it, Occupational Safety and Health Administration. And I believe it was in April of '71 it was formally an office. They had their first employees in, they started acting as a government entity. So quite literally, like within a couple weeks, OSHA and me are the same age. So, but you start talking about it, and nobody really knows. And so people start talking about, what are your safety numbers? Where you work? What are your safety numbers? And some people can rattle off what the number is, or I don't know. They really don't know. And I think it's kind of it's one of those things where it's hard to understand. But I'm going to try to break it down for you in a way that anybody can kind of swallow it and say, okay, that's what that number means, what they talk about, right? So it's like you'll go by in a lot of places, they'll have it up and they'll say, hey, we have worked 859 days without a lost time injury. Okay, that's great. What does that mean, right? What is a lost time injury? So in occupational safety, a lost time injury is an injury that arose out of and in the course of employment. So you're at work, you got hurt because of that work or because you were there doing work. And there's fine points to that too, which will be fun to break some of those down in one of these talks. But you got hurt at work and you go to a physician or whoever, and they say, you know what, you need to take a couple days off work. So the date of the injury, so let's say I get hurt on a Monday morning at work, and I go to the doctor, and doctor says, you know what, take the rest of the day off, you'll be fine, go back to work the next day. Just that. Say he doesn't give you any medication, he doesn't give you any stitches, nothing like that. He just says, okay, it's hot out right now, right? Somebody's at work and they're working out in a lumber yard. And they're working and they get really hot, and all of a sudden they're not feeling good. They go to a doctor. Doctor says, you know what, I think you're dehydrated. You got a bit of heat exhaustion going on, so why don't you take the rest of the day off, go home, sit in the air conditioning, drink plenty of fluids. If you're not feeling any better tomorrow, let me know, but otherwise I'm gonna write you back. You can go back to work in the morning. I'm not giving you any restrictions or anything like that. You're good to go. Just go home and drink some water. That happens, I wake up the next day, I go back to work, I'm fine. That's not OSHA recordable because he didn't give me anything beyond basic first aid, and it's not a lost time. I didn't lose any time. The date of the injury is free. Okay, so just the date of injury is free. You can go home that day and it doesn't count against the employer one way or the other. It's just, it is what it is. You got a little overworked. That's the way they view it. Now, let's say I go in for the same reason. Doctor says the same thing. You need hydrated, you need air conditioning. I'm not gonna give you any pills. I'm not gonna give you any therapy. I'm not gonna do anything like this. However, I don't want you going back to work until Wednesday or Thursday. So now the rest of the day, Monday, I'm off. That doesn't weigh against it, but he gave me time off the next day. That's lost time, okay? Lost time injury plus lost time is beyond basic first aid. So even if he didn't give me a prescription med or a stitch or anything like that, but I'm off the next day on doctor's orders, it's now considered OSHA recordable as well. So there's different tiers, right? So you go, you have first aid injury, then you have what's called an OSHA recordable injury, which I'm going to talk about here. Beyond OSHA recordable, the next one would be a DART case. DART case means days away, which is the highest level, or restricted. Let's say now they send me back and they say, okay, you can go to work, but you have to be sitting 50% of the time, but your job entails you to stand all the time. Your workplace says, yes, we can come up with something you to do, we can have some paperwork or whatever like that, but now you're restricted. You can't do what they call all the essential functions of your job, okay? So it's restricted. It's now OSHA recordable plus a DART case, okay? It's not a lost time because he didn't give you the full day away. He just said you can go back to work, but you're restricted, right? So those are the 3 levels, or 4 levels really. You have a first aid, then you have a recordable, then you have a DART, which includes lost time, but not always are they lost time, and then you have a lost time injury. And then obviously, the one nobody wants to talk about is fatality, right? Workplace fatality. So those are your levels. So now let's talk about what does it mean to have a restriction, right? So a restriction is gonna be if I can't do my full job, all the essential function of my job. So let's say my job entails me, I need to be able to lift 20 pounds regularly, and the doctor says you can go back to work, but I don't want you lifting more than 5 pounds for the next 3 days. But you can go back to work, you can work full time, you can do all this stuff, right? So now it does impact my job. If part of my job entails specifically lifting 20 pounds normally, and I can't do that, so somebody else has to step in and help me out, that's restricted. That's restricted, okay? Or let's say I'm on a job where I stand all the time, and they say, well, you need to be able to sit and stand 50% of the time, okay? Normally don't do that. So now your workplace has to sit there and judge. Because they do everything of their job and still be sitting. Maybe they can, and then it's just as simple as giving them a chair and sit down for those parts that you're doing that are a little lower. Or instead of standing at a desk, you can sit at a desk. If you can do all that, then they can determine, no, that's not, it didn't impact the essential function of their job. They have a restriction. It's kind of like at my work, we don't allow people to lift on their own more than 35 pounds. And so if a doctor sent somebody in and said, hey, you can't lift more than 50 pounds, they'd come back and they're like, I got a restriction, so that's restricted work, right? I'd say, no, that's not restricted work because we don't allow you to lift more than 50 pounds anyway. You can do all of the required aspects of your job. That's not impacted by a 50-pound restriction, right? So if they said you can only lift 25, then it would be. Then it does impact your job. But if we don't even allow you to lift more, like the doctor says you can't lift more than 100 pounds, that's your restriction. Is that restricted work? No, not if your job doesn't even allow you to do that. You can still do your full job. Does that make sense, right? So that's what it is. So now let's talk about recordable, the lowest tier, and the one that most places, when they talk about their OSHA number, that's the number they're talking about, right? It's gonna be what they call the TRIR, or the TCIR, right? So TRIR, total recordable incident rate, or TCIR is total case incident rate, I think. There's different numbers, but they're all the same thing, right? And so, so you take the total number of injuries you've had since January 1st of that year. It goes on a calendar year, all right? So starting January 1, if you have one injury, then you would take that number one, the number of injuries, times 200,000, okay? Remember that number. I'll come back to that number and explain to you what that means. And then you divide that number by the total hours worked by all employees at that plant, at that address, right? So if I have, and I don't have a number, so if you did the case rate for me, let's say you had one OSHA recordable injury and you had 100,000 hours worked, right? So you'd have 200,000 divided by 100,000 would be 2. That's what that would come back. That's your OSHA recordable rate. Okay, so that's what that number means. It breaks down to, it's a percentage. If you work at that plant, what is the percentage likelihood that you're going to get hurt bad enough that it goes OSHA recordable? So you want that number as low as possible. 0 is ideal, right? And a lot of really small workplaces get away with that. But then when they have one injury one year, they may only have 20 employees or something like that. That one injury against only 20 employees' hours is going to skyrocket their number. It's just going to be astronomically high based on if you work in a plant that has 5,000 people in it and they only have one injury. Their injury number is going to be minuscule, right? But that works out because most places don't have those numbers, and so that percentage is fairly accurate because it moves. Now, how do you get a percentage out of that? Well, here it is. Remember that 200,000 number I told you about? Okay, so what's 200,000? The average American worker gets about 2 weeks off a year, so that 50 hours or 50 weeks a year that person's expected to be working, generally speaking, right? This is broad generalities, right? 50 weeks a year. Take off 2 weeks for vacation, 50 weeks a year, workers are working, and let's say they work 40 hours a week. Okay? One person, 40 hours a week times 50, 2,000. Times 100 workers, 100 gives you your percentage. That's 200,000. That's where that number comes from. It's for the average hours worked by 100 people. So that's why when we say if I have an OSHA recordable injury rate of a 3.5 and I work in that plant, that means I have about a 3.5% chance likelihood I'm going to get hurt bad enough that it's OSHA recordable. That's where that number comes in. So when you talk about OSHA rates, that's what you're talking about. What is OSHA recordable? OSHA recordable is essentially, it's anything beyond basic first aid. So if I'm at work and I get a cut on my finger and I wash it and I get a bandage on it, that's not OSHA recordable, that's basic first aid. Say I got a cut bad enough, I got to go to a doctor, and the doctor's like, oh, that's pretty rough, I got to put a couple stitches in there. Now you got an OSHA recordable. That's beyond basic first aid. Or my shoulder strain, right? I get a shoulder strain at work and I'm sitting there and we go in and somebody says, put some ice on it, give you some icy hot or something like that, BioFreeze. BioFreeze is magical, by the way. Put that stuff on my shoulder. You can still use it. I want you moving it around and everything, but just, only use it as tolerated. Those are great words, right? As tolerated means work, but don't push beyond that comfort zone, right? You just work as much as you can, but I want you to keep using that shoulder, because sometimes the worst thing you can do, putting that shoulder in a sling, don't move this thing for a week, and now your shoulder can lock up if you're not moving it around. So a lot of doctors that know what they're talking about, they'll have you moving that thing around a lot, right? So so I got a shoulder strain, ice pack, put some icy hot on it, take some over the counter relief or whatever like that. Take that, you'll be fine. Take it easy for a few weeks, everything like that. Work is tolerated. I'm not giving you any specific restrictions. First aid. All that is, that's a first aid. Because that as tolerated, he's not giving you specific restrictions. He's saying just take it easy. Most workplaces will bend over backwards. At least the ones I've worked for will bend over backwards to try to keep you working, but let you heal 100%. The sooner you heal, the better they are. So if we push you to the point where you're not healing in time, all that's doing is costing us money. So it's our benefit to have you heal up as soon as possible. So most places will bend over backwards, right? But now let's say same shoulder. I go to a doctor and the doctor says, you know what? I'm going to write your prescription. Now you've gone OSHA recordable, right? Even if I've had employees come back, doctor wrote me a prescription, I threw it up, I'm like, it's your own call, but you just as well take it, because once that's written, that's OSHA recordable. It's beyond first aid. See? a doctor gives you restrictions. I talked about this earlier, right? Gives you restrictions. You cannot do all the essential functions of your job with those restrictions. It is now OSHA recordable, but only if it impacts all the essential functions of your job. But like I said, if a doctor says you got a restriction, you can't lift more than 100 pounds, and you can't run up and down flights of stairs all day. Well, we're one floor. We don't have stairs, so that doesn't impact what you do, and we don't allow you to lift more than 100 pounds. So now it's not recordable. But if he does give you restrictions that do impact that you're not able to do the full job, that's OSHA recordable. So stitches, physical therapy, they give you physical therapy beyond just telling you to do a couple stretches or something like that. Any kind of formal physical therapy, prescription pain medication, chipped tooth, even if there's nothing they can do about it, that's considered a broken bone. Right? Amputation, obviously, OSHA recordable. Loss of an eye, OSHA recordable. Anything like that, any kind of broken bone, anything that require any overnight hospitalization, inpatient treatment, right? OSHA recordable. And there are certain things that starts the clock ticking as far as if your employer has multiple people put in the hospital overnight, admitted, or if any individual is admitted on an inpatient basis, they have to reach out and they have to personally contact OSHA, let them know that that happened. Amputations, they have to let them know about that happen. Obviously, workplace fatalities. So those are OSHA recordable injuries. They can also happen while somebody's traveling for work, right? If I'm working at another plant for my work sends me somewhere to do some work and I get hurt, that's OSHA recordable, because the only reason I got hurt, I was there on behalf of the company, and it can happen during travel for work. Matter of fact, I think vehicular accidents are the highest workplace injury. I think that's the number one injury is injuries in transportation, or transporting, moving, travel. So OSHA recordable, that's what that OSHA recordable rate means, right? So it's recordable. If it's a lost time, it counts as recordable. If it's DART, it counts as recordable. Anything beyond first aid, recordable. Those are all recordables. DART, days away, so that lost time injury counts into this one, plus anything that's just recordable because it restricted your work. That falls into this middle category. So if you're doing it, your OSHA recordable rate should always be higher, because everything gets captured in this one as recordable. DART would be your next smallest, and hopefully your lost times is 0 or a very small number, because if every injury is going lost time, you probably got to work with your physicians about how we're defining that and what they're doing for your people. Because if they're giving everybody days off, that is what it is. And then there's also rules, and I can get about this. So if you're out on workers' comp, guys, you are not getting your full paycheck. Despite what anybody tells you, you're not. You're going to get about 60%, and that varies based on states, but it's usually anywhere from 60 to 65% is what you're going to get. You're not going to get your full paycheck. And so people tend to think that. So if your workplace is willing, if you get injured and they're willing to keep you at work and give you one of these restricted duties, you're going to be still making your full pay. So it works out in everybody's best interest to have you at work. Not only that, but most employers tend to watch their employees that are hurt and make sure you're healing right. And if you're not, because a lot of employees just, for whatever reason, they think they're being a pain to their employer about complaining about an injury that's not healing right. It's like, no, we want to know if you're not healing right, so we can get you back in there, because like I said, it's in everybody's best interest to get you healed up 100% as soon as we possibly can. All right. So now that I'm saying it, that's a whole other video on its own, is case management and getting people back to work. So for right now, I hope that breaks down and kind of explains to you a little bit better about what those OSHA recordable rates mean and what do we mean by them, right? Because that's what we really get judged on. The government will look at us and they're going to go down their list, or the Department of Labor, they're going to look down there and they're going to say, well, this place has an OSHA recordable rate of a 20. That's pretty high. 1 in 5 of their employees, right? We need to investigate it. Whereas if they're looking sometimes, and believe you me, if you're a general industry plant that has year after year after year of zeros, that might draw some attention too. They might want to come in there and say, hey, are we underreporting, right? Because that does happen at some places. So Anyway, OSHA recordable rates is a percentage likelihood that you'll get injured if you work in that plant, and that's a little skewed. It all depends on how good they are about reporting injuries and all this kind of stuff, but that's what those numbers mean. So if you're working at a place and you ask them what their recordable rate is, anybody in management should be able to spit out a number pretty quickly to you, or at least get it for you very quickly. It's a very important number to follow, and it's kind of a bell cow as far as is this a good place to work or not? Is this a safe place to work or not? So I hope that explained it a little bit to you, and I look forward to talking to you more down the road. So, hey, I'm Papa Todd. This is Todd Talks. Thanks for spending a few minutes with me. And until next time, work safe and keep thinking for yourself.